The episode was recorded during the Parliamentary side event at the UNFCCC COP28, titled The Escazú Agreement in Action for Climate Empowerment, Strengthening Environmental Democracy in Latin America and the Caribbean, which was held on December 4th, 2023 in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. The session explored the importance of supporting the implementation of both mechanisms in order to strengthen environmental democracy and meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. Alicia Todd, Director General of Parliamentarians, moderated the panel dialogue, which featured the participation of the Honourable Carolyn Trench-Sandiford, President of the Senate of Belize and Parliamentarians board member, the Honourable Decima Williams, President of the Senate of Grenada and Parliamentarians board member, Honourable Representative of Colombia Juan Carlos Lozada, and Carlos de Miguel, Head of the Sustainable Development and Human Settlements Division of ECLAC. As a secretariat to the Escazú Agreement, ECLAC provided an overview of the implementation efforts of the Escazú Agreement in the region. The parliamentarians shared initiatives their parliaments are taking on in order to support implementation efforts, recognizing the role environmental democracy mechanisms play in empowering non-governmental actors, including women and girls, Indigenous groups, and traditionally marginalized communities, in enabling effective and inclusive climate action and contributing to related decision-making.
So to get us started, though, to help frame the discussion, I am going to call on Carlos de Miguel first here and ask you, can you provide a brief overview of the implementation of the Escazú Agreement in the region, and how can Parliament support these implementation efforts to help achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement?
Wow, it's a long question. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I have to congratulate my colleagues from Grenada and Belize because they are parties of the Escazú Agreement, and hopefully soon Colombia will be party. The Parliament made the work, but we have the final stage. First of all, to say that the Economic Commission of Latin America and the Caribbean works to promote sustainable development in the region and cooperation among the countries of the region. And climate change is one of the topics that we work hardly. Today, we launch one document on the economics of climate change and precisely to do a fair transition. And to do a fair transition, you have dialogue, you need cooperation, we need to consider the people in the territories. And the Escazú Agreement is a way of doing things. It's a way of doing the things in the right way with the communities and with all the people involved. It's about access to information, creating the information, which, by the way, in the Caribbean is very needed, and to promote participation and access to justice. And also it includes provision to defend the environmental defenders, which are the ones that are protecting the environment in the region. And if you know the news in Latin America, because in the Caribbean it's less dramatic, every day there are environmental defenders killed in our region. So the Escazú Agreement, we have already started the process of implementing the agreement, entering into force in 2001. We have already 2 conferences of the party. In the first conference of the party, there were 6 decisions. One is on environmental defenders, and we're starting a working group to search for solutions to solve this problematic issue in the region, and also to discuss an action plan for the protection of the environmental defenders. This obviously will trigger actions at the national level, not only at the regional level. So to reinforce these actions in the parliaments will be fundamental. Another decision was to establish the compliance committee of the Escazú Agreement, which will be a tool to support the countries and the public to the implementation of the agreement. And the other decisions were also important, but I don't have much time to focus on that. The second conference of the party was extraordinary, and we elect the representatives for the compliance committee. We have 3 representatives from the Caribbean sub-region, 4 from the Latin American sub-region, and they are soon in the next conference of the party be ready to support all the parties. But it is very important to think that the Escazú Agreement has 2 words that are fundamental. in the Article 1 of the agreement. Implementation. Implementation is the word. We have a lot of legislation, particularly in the Latin countries, and a lot of jurisprudence in the Caribbean countries, but we need to implement. And for implementation, sometimes you need legislation, but also you need policy control from the parliaments to the executives of the countries. And also, sometimes you need budget, and the parliaments also review the budget. So there are plenty of opportunities to support the implementation at the national level. Right now, we are working in implementation plans in 6 countries. The last one that we are starting is in Belize with the support of the World Bank, but we want this process of implementation in every single country, because this is the way to do the things, is to review the articles and to do the things at the country level. And together with implementation, the other word that I like in the Escazú Agreement is capacity building and cooperation. Again, the cooperation between and among the parliaments and the different networks that the parliament have will be fundamental. ECLAC is not a traditional, it's a UN organization, an economic organization, and traditionally works with the executives, the executive power. Because of the Escazú, we are working more and more with the parliaments, because we see this is the way of making the transformation that we need for the Paris Agreement implementation as well. And I will conclude saying that the Escazú Agreement is not just the Articles 6 and 12 of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. Human rights and climate change are interconnected. If we don't change the things at the country level and we do this transformation faster, the lives of the people in our countries, particularly in the Caribbean and some countries in Latin America, will be much affected in the economic, social, and personal direction. And in the case of the Latin countries, Colombia is a case, we need to improve environmental democracy. We need to reinforce the institution and the rule of law, because it is not something that we can allow anymore to receive the news of more people killing just because they protect the environment. And this is something that we need to solve. So the parliaments need to support the implementation, control the implementation, and also cooperate among all of us and the other powers in the countries to making the reality of the Escazú Agreement. And I think with this, I have my minutes.
You've done very well. Thank you, sir. Look, and I have many follow-up questions. I'm going to hold them to the end, though. We're going to continue with the panel, but I do have some questions for you. I do want to, though, reflect what Senator Galvez mentioned, how grateful we are. We're pleased to have signed that MOU with ECLAC. I do think that this will strengthen the partnership to move forward on this agenda. And also, though, just to reflect here for others to understand, that works closely with ECLAC for parliamentarians who are listening or might be here, is that Parliamentarians for Global Action, I know also is a key organization that has been working in this space as well, that we collaborate with, and that I'm sure that we'll find ways to engage them in with the work of the Green Caucus as well. I'm moving to Madam President, but now I realize I have 2 Madam Presidents. So Madam President Trent Sandiford, I'm going to pass it over to you next and say, with your responsibility for the Escazú Agreement under your Parliament's UN Joint Agreement Work Plan, what are a few of the key ways the country, in particular, the Parliament, is working to meet the agreement's core objectives of strengthened access to information, participation, and capacity on environmental topics?
Thank you, Alicia, and I will try to keep to that 6 minutes. But very briefly, to give a context, our Constitution provides a bicameral parliament, National Assembly. So we have the lower house with 31 representatives and the upper house with 13 representatives, and it is the Senate that ratifies international agreements. So as was previously said, we did ratify the UNFCCC in 94, the Paris Agreement in 96, and as recent as February this year, the Escazú Agreement. In December last year, actually 1 year ago, we signed a declaration of intent with the United Nations Country Office in Belize. And the whole idea of the intent was for Parliament to partner with the UN to build awareness and knowledge of all the agreements that Belize have signed. And we pioneered it in a way that simply because the UN country office normally signs agreements with the executive branch of government and not the legislative branch of government. So this was pioneering and new for us. In terms of the ways, there are three key ways I can quickly share. One way is that how we create and sustain an environment for learning, knowledge sharing, and knowledge construction and application. Recently, we had the Climate Crisis Forum for Parliamentarians. And we felt before we can be advocates or protagonists of these agreements, we need to first know what they contain. But not only us, also the general public needs to know on how they can hold Parliament accountable. So we recently had this Climate Crisis Forum for Parliamentarians where we brought in the UN and they provided us with the what, the why, the challenges of the Paris Agreement. We brought in Parliamentarians. We heard from a senator from Trinidad and Tobago, hearing what other countries are doing so that our parliamentarians can also learn. We also brought the parliamentarians themselves so they can begin talking about what is happening at their constituency level, what's the impact, what are their constituents saying about climate, how it's impacting on their livelihoods, and more importantly, what message they want to carry to COP28. And that was very interesting. And so we felt that that was the approach we wanted to use with all the agreements, including the Escazú. So we're looking for February 2024 for the Escazú. Secondly, as presiding officer, both the speaker and myself, we encourage our parliamentarians to use the provision of the standing orders. Our standing orders governs how our parliament function. And I recall when the Escazú Agreement was introduced, there was a motion, there was a debate, and the entire news cycle for a couple of days had contents of that debate. So that is one way, how we utilize the media. Other ways is that when we do capacity training on any matter, we say use the personal statement part of the order of business to talk about the training, what you learn, and to share your knowledge with other people. We also have within the order of business the whole issue of raising matters on the adjournment and on matters of national public importance. So if you know an issue taking place, some environmental violation, human rights violation, you can bring it to the knowledge of Parliament through these provisions. And finally, one of the things we also felt was important was to partner with the executive branch as well, because the executive branch, that is where the focal point is for these conventions. And while we have an oversight and scrutiny role, we also felt we could also champion the role. So we approached the Ministry of Sustainable Development, Climate Change, and Disaster Management. And as has been mentioned, they're currently working on their roadmap. And we said, well, we know you didn't include us in the beginning, but we want to be a part of that roadmap. And so we inserted ourselves in the conversation. And now we are seen as a partner, complementing the work that the executive does, while at the same time ensuring we maintain our scrutiny and oversight commitment to ensure that not only the parliamentarians, like I said, but we report back to the Belizean people on how Belize is doing as to its commitments and obligations under these conventions. So I will leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Madam President. I'm now turning to you, Representative Lozada. You are leading a bill on environmental democracy. Can you tell us how it aims to support the objectives of the Escazú Agreement and of ACE?
Well, thank you so much, Alicia. Thank you to my fellow colleagues here with me. Of course, to Senator Rosa Galvez and all the other parliamentarians here at the Parliamentary Pavilion. First, I want to say that nobody is happier than me with the coming together of CEPAL or ECLAC with Parliamentarians, because I was one of the founders of the OPCC, and to us to be able to collaborate with Parliamentarians was something that I thought we had to do, and I called on Rosa and on the two organizations, and I think that's gonna work out really well. So I'm very happy for that. To answer the question, I want to put a little bit in context. In Colombia, for more than 10 years, people were able to use one of the participation tools that our constitution gave them to decide if in a certain territory you could or not do a development that had to do with mining or extraction of minerals. And in 2016, the Constitutional Court said that this was actually constitutional. But then 2 years after, they changed, and they said that that kind of participation did not meet the purposes of the participation mechanism, and that the public consultants were unconstitutional. But in that same pronunciation of the court, they said that there is a huge gap of participation for people. So it's really contradictory that in one hand they say in Colombia, participation of the people in extractive context is minimum, but they took out the way they were participating, because in the 10 times that the participation was done, people voted against fossil fuel extraction or mineral extractions. So it's obvious that the Constitutional Court was keeping somebody's interest. And I can say it like this because it's obvious. So we need a way to give communities participation back, but not a kind of participation that the government can then just not listen to, but it has to be incidental. There has to be some kind of decision making by the communities on this matter. So we created 3 kinds of participation that ensure, first of all, that people can be part of the decision making, but also that government will give them the precise information that they need to take the decision. So I think in that sense, the project takes at least 2 of the principles of the Escazú Agreement, which is participation, and the second one is the right to information and transparency. Today in Colombia, when a company comes and wants to start a project in some area, they have no obligation on telling, for instance, what the consequences for health or for environment are going to be in this development. But with our law, they will have to give all that information, and the government has to be somehow the garante, I don't know how you say, the one who makes them accountable for the information they give the population before that is done. And that is very important, Alicia, because Colombia might be the country where we have most social, environmental conflicts in the world. And sadly, as CELAC said here, sorry, what's your name again? Carlos, as Carlos said, mi tocayo, those social environmental conflicts translate very sadly in Colombia in people killed. We are the country where people who defend Earth, who defend Mother Nature, are most killed for it in the world. In the last study of Global Witness, there's 60 defenders of the Earth killed in a year where actually we passed from 215 defenders of the Earth killed in the world to 177. So that means our participation in the violence against defenders of the Earth has grown in Colombia. So participation might be the factor that cools down the social environmental conflicts in the territories that end up in defenders killed. So I think it's a project that is absolutely connected to the Escazú Agreement.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I would. I mean, it's just more, this is a tremendous law that you're undertaking there in Colombia. And I guess goes to one of my points here. It sounds like in Colombia, I mean, work is being done regardless of having yet joined Escazú. And so that efforts can be underway to get Colombia to work with Escazú, but we can be working with the parliament and parliamentarians to still advance the principles of Escazú.
As Carlos was saying, we only have one more step to take to be in the Escazú Agreement. President already said he signed the Escazú Agreement. It has to be ratified by Congress. We did that after a huge battle, because right now you can see Iván Duque walking on the COP and writing books on environmental future and stuff, but he did not want to ratify Escazú, which is a huge contradiction. We did it in this government, and now we only need the review from the Constitutional Court, so we hope they do that very quickly.
Amazing. Madam President Williams of Grenada, I bring you next into this conversation. Grenada has recently ratified the Escazú Agreement. What are some of the preliminary steps the Parliament has taken to ensure that the national laws, budgets, and plans align with the agreement and support the population's empowerment on environmental matters?
Pleasant good afternoon to our President, Senator Galvez, and to the colleagues on the platform here. As you heard, the Escazú Agreement is in effect in Grenada, and it's one of the newest in our Latin American and Caribbean region. Its intentions apply to us in Grenada. And Escazú is principally, as you already know, about public access to environmental information, environmental decision-making, and legal protection and recourse concerning environmental matters. So why the passage of Escazú in Grenada? The actual passage of the convention was done in 23 this year, and it was in part, done as a speeding up of matters which this new administration which came into effect in July of last year. They came into office in 2022, and they intended to sign a new covenant with the public in terms of popular engagement and making sure that there was the state itself would not be involved in delays for justice and democracy. So one of the egregious state of affairs was the very slow rate of implementation of laws, policies, and general operations. So the passage of Escazú should be seen in that context, as part of the new sort of national transformation agenda, in which what could be done would be done. So in a sense, it wasn't only about Escazú, but Escazú became part and parcel of a new momentum, a new impetus in the society. Now, there seemed to have been no fanfare, regarding the ratification of the treaty, but the leading advocate has been an NGO in the region, the Caribbean Natural Resource Institute, CANARI. And CANARI played a role similar to ECLAC. And let me congratulate ECLAC for being the secretariat and the repository. Well, the UN is the repository, but you're the secretariat. And for this new initiative on the green economy through Escazú. Certainly, I think Grenada would like to be a part of that. But we have a slightly different culture or history in the Caribbean than in Latin America. There's not so much massive street protests and the killing of environmental workers. Street protests, I have a whole long prepared remarks on all of that, but I know that we are short for time. So I would say in the last 4 decades, we have been a bit quiet in terms of protests. But even within that, there's been some initiatives around environmental activism. Let me speak about the most important one that actually was initiated before Escazú. And now that we have ratified the two will come together, the actions and the rights provided by the agreement. Now, so whereas we have had in the past, leading individuals, environmentalists, calling on the state to do the right thing in regards to protecting people's rights and the pristine landscape, whether on land or in ocean, and to protect them mainly from developers. Our challenge is also similar to Latin America in that sense, but it is developers for tourism development who want access to the beachfront property and who sometimes beginning to build without the strictest conformity to social and environmental impact assessment. That's been our main demand of the state until Escazú. And it hasn't always been agreed to. So now we have it, and this is one of the goals that we have, which is access to information. Do we know what has been agreed to between the state and the developer, and is that in conformity with the law? That's an area where the challenge has been. So there are about 3 or 4 mega projects that have been undertaken in the country, and the changing landscape, there's been a new environmental coalition of mainly younger environmentalists. They came up to argue for a stronger and a clearer balance between, these tourism projects and the sustainable development, which is the protection of the natural environment. They call themselves the land actors, and they have been out and front and center. And without Escazú, they brought a civil case to the court demanding more information about some of these mega projects, which they have accused of not taking sufficiently into consideration environmental factors. In fact, they claim that these projects are violating both written and unwritten environmental regulations. Now, that lawsuit was a civil suit. It was taken in 2020, and it called for 2 principal things. It called for access to information, and it called for, it charged the government as being in violation of its own regulation regarding the building rules and regulations. So now that we have Escazú, we will see what happens. The lower courts have since ruled that it is possible, it is correct to take this action, and they've left the parliament sort of playing catch up. So now I think, the main challenge we have, as I say, the main elephant in the room is that a very small percentage of the population know about Escazú, including people in the parliament. We just don't know about it enough. And that would be our first sort of post facto action, because it's been ratified. We didn't have a lot to do with the ratification. One of the regional NGOs came and trained a lot of civil society. It's ratified, but now begins the hard work of informing and taking action. I think one of the things we'd have to do in the parliament is to get a Freedom of Information Act in place, so that could be used perhaps more than, before, or in preference to the courts. And so I would say that we welcome partnerships, because under SDG number 16, yes, the right to justice, the right to, information, to rights, we can use that in an alliance of education to promote the accord and fill that information and legislation gaps. Because we think that there are going to be more contestations around development choices, and we would certainly want to be involved in a positive way. In closing, let me say that we are already playing a big role, because one of the compliance committee, we have a judge. Yes, she's newly retired, and it's a woman, so we hope that that sort of pivots a little bit towards the gender or women's involvement in all of this work. Judge Rita Joseph Olivetti is elected to serve 6 years on the committee, and I think through her, she's actually involved in some of the land actors' work in Grenada. She's on the Escazú Compliance Committee, and I think those of us women in Parliament, we have a women's committee, and we have been working on the environment as a parliamentary agenda with Parliamentarians. So I think we are beginning to get a critical mass for some needed action.
Thank you, Madam President. And then you segued us nicely right all the way into my next set of question, which is one question for all of the panel, but it's really on this part about this participation piece. Why it became so natural for Parliamentarians to really want to partner with ECLAC on Escazú and the implementation of Escazú is because it really marries together our three major pillars of work: the open parliament agenda, open parliament, open government. I mean, Escazú, the way it's written, it's exactly that, right? It's applying these concepts of open government and, for us, open parliament to now environmental legislation, to environmental work. And so it seems so natural for us to work there. And a big part of that work that we're doing throughout the region is on advancing sort of citizen participation in the work of parliaments, right? How do we engage with citizens? And then in particular, our other passion, gender equality. In particular, how do you engage women, girls, persons from marginalized groups into those spaces, right? And the open government agenda really helps provide that as well. It's this idea of trying to create spaces that brings people to decision-making tables who aren't normally allowed into those spaces. And here, Escazú really provides a nice framework for that. So the second question for each of you really to answer is this idea that, like, we know that non-government actors, including women and girls, Indigenous groups, other traditionally marginalized communities, they do play such a crucial role to enabling effective and inclusive climate action and related decision making. But so how in your parliaments are you ensuring that your environmental decision making is inclusive, contributes to transformative results for these groups, including providing safe spaces for environmental defenders to come and speak and work with parliaments? Representative Lozada, I would like to ask you first.
Well, Alicia, we of course have a very big problem in Colombia, because if you see, out of the 60 defenders of Earth killed last year, half of them come from indigenous communities. Indigenous communities are only 4% of our population, and is half of the people killed in the country. So it's obvious that we have to work on their protection. They have to be subjects of special protection. And in our law, we included that every time that one of these participation mechanisms is open, all of the parties who participate become people of special protection, and the Minister of Interior and the UNP, which is the branch of the Minister of Interior dedicated to the security of social leaders, has to take them in account that now they are subject of special protection. Of course, there's no much that we can do from Congress more than this kind of legislations. It is up to the government also to take the responsibility on assuring the peace in those territories, because right now, Colombia has 11,000 people killed per year. It's a tragedy. And it's a tragedy because we thought that that number will come down after the peace agreement, and it hasn't. And one of the criticisms that are, I think, most relevant to the Petro government right now is that he's neglecting the regional security in the country. And you can see that very clearly in the actions of some of the traditional guerrillas and the drug dealing cartels, who are always somehow in the interest of these kind of developments that end up in social conflicts, that end up in the killing of defenders of the environment. So it's a big concern. I think we're going to have to do a big political control to the government right now to see why is it that a government who promised to, and that, you know, when they were in the opposition, they kept criticizing government because of the killings, but it hasn't come down in their first year and a half. Actually, it might have come up. So I think it's not only the action of what we can do through the law, but it has to be a decided political will of protecting the defenders of the earth. It's so sad, and with this I will close up. The Global Witness study showed that in the world there were 5 children killed for defending the earth. One of them is in Colombia. We have a very young, very famous defender of the earth in Francisco Vera Manzanares, who had to leave the country because of the amenazas, how you say, the threats to his life, which is very sad. He will be coming today to COP or tomorrow. It's very sad to have our children threatened and killed in the country because of defending environment. So this is absolutely one of the key issues in my country, and we're going to see what kind of debates we can do and what kind of laws we can pass, but we have to call on government to take a very serious action in this matter.
Thank you. Madam President, for Belize, it's the same question really, though, is this concept of what's Belize doing to try to promote greater inclusive engagement from citizens into this decision-making process?
We have a senator representing non-governmental organizations. And so that's very unique. And what is also unique in our Senate is that the government does not have the majority in terms of the numbers. So the government, of the 13 senators we have, the government appoints 6, the opposition appoints 3, and we have 4 appointed by unions, business, church, and the NGOs. And that has been very crucial in terms of a voice for the environment, for human rights, for indigenous communities, and so on and so forth, because the NGO senator is elected by the NGO community themselves. And there's a group called the Belize Network of NGOs, and that represents NGOs, community-based organizations from environment, from indigenous people, human rights, the elderly, youth, children, the LGBTQ communities, and so on and so forth. And so they have that voice in Parliament that they can scrutinize any legislation that come through the lens of environmentalists, human rights activists, and so on and so forth. And I also mentioned earlier that the Parliament provides, in its standing orders, a space for, in the lower house as well as in the upper house, a space to speak on matters of national public importance. And I can say from the Senate's perspective that the NGO senator has been the one leading that case. And so oftentimes they would ask to speak on a matter, and oftentimes those matters relate to some commitment or obligation the government have signed on to with a global partner that they are not meeting. And so that is one way in which one can look at how inclusive and enabling and transformative the Parliament can be. A next way that we do in Belize is that recently we established the Women Parliamentarian Caucus in 2022. And in Belize, 20.5% of our parliamentarians are women, 4 of 31 in the lower house and 5 of 13 in the upper house. And the chair of the caucus is the NGO senator, who happens to be a woman. And that was strategic because the idea was to ensure that the conversation doesn't get tainted with the partisan politics that is traditional of politics and you know, in the Caribbean. You're either for government or you oppose the government. But we wanted to look at things a bit differently. And we also wanted to look at issues of gender, inclusivity, and so on and so forth, climate, for example, more from a developmental lens rather than an environmental lens. And we felt that by by putting together the caucus, we begin to bring different perspectives and different voices on these issues. Recently, the caucus organized a forum to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights, and we've been speaking about the Escazú and how it intersects with the SDGs, with the human rights, and so on and so forth. And central to that conversation were issues relating to environment and climate justice, and so on and so forth. And at that forum, similarly to the climate crisis forum we had, and this is adding my 1 minute, we did not only include parliamentarians. We invited the judiciary, we invited civil society organizations, community-based organizations. We even invited students to come because the idea was that, yes, we can talk about Parliament learning more about these agreements and their commitments and providing that information and so on and so forth. But we wanted the civil society, we wanted students, we wanted general citizenry to also know what the parliamentarians are to do. Because if the citizenry knows what parliamentarians are to do, then citizenry can also hold the parliamentarians accountable. So that was a very successful forum that we had there. And like I've said, that what we've been trying to do with Parliament in Belize is to reimagine Parliament, that it is not just a Parliament that when elected focus at least in our scenario, we tend to focus the government, political party wins, and the government focuses on governing through the executive, but their role as parliamentarian is kind of discounted. We're trying to say to the Belizean people that first and foremost, you get elected, you're a parliamentarian. And we want to reimagine what Parliament can look like when parliamentarians focus on their role as a parliamentarian. And being part of the oversight and scrutiny of the executive branch of government is very key to that. But for us in the Senate, it becomes even more so because within the lower house, they have the cabinet, because we have ministers of government who come from the lower house. So it is important for us that the Senate take on that role of scrutinizing and oversight of the executive, who makes up the majority, majority come from the lower house anyway. And so that is what we've been doing in terms of inclusivity and trying to ensure that information gets out, and trying to ensure that we include the voices, and you hear the voices of marginalized groups, indigenous groups, women, children, and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Madam President. And I'm going to turn next to my other Madam President. President Williams, was there anything further you wanted to share? Because you went right into question 2 with your first remarks. But
Yes, thank you. And I could also say that what Madam President of Belize has said applies, 90% to Grenada. Yes. We start with our constitution. We have freedom of speech, and we've had rise and fall around political activism in the country. And while now the issue of sustainable development is running up against the question of investment-driven, foreign investment-driven development around tourism, I think we might see more public expression. We hope no killings, but more public expression, and that is provided for in the Constitution. Also, and in our tradition. Also, we have in the Parliament, we do have advocates. We used to have a senator for women's affairs. We don't. We have the government has 6. The opposition has 3, and we have 3 independents: 1 for Labour, one for business, and one for farmers. And that's a big constituency. And I think just like your NGO person, the Senator for Farmers and Fishers is very active, very independent, and will take up issues around environment as well. So we have those sorts of structural arrangements. There's much more we can say about the Women's Caucus. We also have a Women's Caucus, the oldest one in the Caribbean, yes. And the women there across party lines are very engaged and bold and take up issues. As I said in my opening remarks, in my first part, and you repeated that, this is new for us, Escazú and the whole environmental movement coming home. But I think it falls on very fertile soil in that we have had a very strong NGO movement in the country. And we anticipate already with the court case that the government is going to be kept on its toes to do the right thing. So what we miss, and I want to repeat, is collaboration. How do you going to do it in Belize? What is going to happen through ECLAC? How is Colombia going to teach us lessons? So this is the role of Parliamentarians to network everybody together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, and you kind of led me to where the way I was going to direct the question here for Carlos was you're hearing here from parliamentarians the ways they are trying to apply it in their parliaments, and it's specifically some of the mechanisms they're using for this engagement piece, right, to bring in citizens' voices. Madam President has already put you on the hot seat and saying part of it is they would like some support, some mechanisms. But from the perspective of ECLAC, like what are some of the ways that you are trying to envisage as the secretariat for how Escazú can better engage with citizens? How are countries going to be able to roll out these mechanisms for engagement with their citizens?
I was listening my colleagues, and I came to me many ideas and many things to respond to them. But I would like to send a message. Escazú, I would say, is an open space where everybody has been welcome. Only 10 countries start the process. There was a small groups of civil society. There were some parliamentarians, because Maureen Payne for Antigua and Barbuda, the Senator Payne, was part of the negotiating process and has been from the beginning. But also the judiciary, Winston Anderson for the Caribbean Court of Justice was one of the supporters. So everybody was welcome. And I think this is something that should continue. We all collaborate and we search for solutions to the problems of the region. And in this sense, and this is a message for the parliamentarians, it is very important for ECLAC that when in the countries that they are in the process of ratification, this is something for all the parties. I mean, the access rights should not be in doubt for any party. This is something that all the parties should support and approve by unanimity in the parliaments, as happened in the Caribbean and in many countries in Latin America. The other things that are also important is that the parliamentarians can participate directly, and all the civil society, all the groups, through the public regional mechanisms. You just register and you get involved in the process. And obviously, everybody is welcome to participate in the conference of the party, because the public means all. There is not major groups. Everybody can participate. The other important, let's say, is part of the institution is the representatives from the public. By the way, there are 6 people elected by the public, which are all the groups that, let's say, channel the, let's say, worries, solutions, interests of the different people to discuss with the presiding officers and the secretariat in the process. And by the way, Nicole Lothar from the Canary group is one of the representatives in this group. And another way of participating and getting involved is that supporting the Escazú Agreement, and is part of one of the articles. It was created in a clearinghouse. It's the Observatory of Principle 10, where there is a repository of laws, other treaties, jurisprudence, and everybody is sending us what is going in the countries, and we upload it. So you learn from the other countries. You have legislation, you have what is going on the access rights. is very complementary to the OPCC because this is more focused in environmental aspects. And the other things is to support the local implementation. We are, for example, right now supporting with the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States the implementation of environmental information systems. This is a way where we develop information to share with everybody, but we are also supporting in the Latin countries to the system of environmental licensing, which is fundamental to promote the participation when you are doing the environmental impact assessment to the projects. So this is another way of supporting. And now we are discussing the participatory process in the countries, mainly in South America at this time. But obviously everybody is open. So there are plenty of possibilities, and the Escazú Agreement has connected with many networks that before we were not connected. So now the parliaments are involved. You can do a lot of things to implement the agreement and other things, but it is important to make the people to know the agreement, to read the agreement, because in the agreement there are many provisions. For example, there is a provision to promote participation in the international forums, such as this one, and others. And so it is not just environmental defenders, it's not just participation, all the provisions are interconnected. You will not address the environmental defenders problem if there is not rule of law, transparency, participatory process, access to information. So everything is interconnected. And I was just to end, and sorry for the delay, to thank Ms. Galvez and Parliamentarians to join us in this partnership. I'm sure that in the future we will do many things with the Escazú Agreement, and also in other aspects to promote sustainable development in Latin America and the Caribbean, and ECLAC is working for that.
Thank you so much.